Laura Hurtado, and I was really interested in this theme of roots because it made me organize the exhibition in a much different way than I normally would have. The prompt talked about kind of digging deep into what your origins were or are, and kind of how you came to be where you were or where you are. So that's where I started. And the first slide, when it comes up, is a slide of, well, this is my title. So the second slide. Roots are also branches. So I was thinking about, actually the way that you tell the history of yourself actually reflects who you are, more about who you are today than actually the history itself. Like, history's posture as objective things, like this thing happened and this thing happened, but really the way that we craft the story and the versions we tell of the story tell us a lot about who we are today. And so that was something I had been thinking about when organizing this talk. So I want to start with this, because nothing says feminism more than a 1980s club wagon. But my interest in art and art history started in a clubbed wagon. I'm one of five, and my mom used to drive us, load us all up in this big club wagon, plus spares. And neighbors, friends, cousins, whoever, and we would go drive the 45 minutes to LA County Museum of Art, and quite bravely, I think, would take us all in there, sticky-fingered, wiggly. And we would be respectful to give her, maybe 20 minutes before we wanted to go to the bathroom or leave. But that was where my love of museums started. And really, what she liked was this kind of stuff. Her favorite artist was Meritocracy, and especially mother and child scenes. She was a copyist painter. At that time, and so she recreated these Mary Cassatt, so they hung all around our house, and there's something very, very intimate about these paintings in the way that the child, on the right, or the left, I don't know, the one with a lot of color, where her hand dissolves into the child's body, and so anyway, that's kind of where my first love of a female artist started, and love of art history began. But it was very, very traditional. These are gilded frames, figurative work, clear narrative. And then when I turned 16, I went back to the LACMA, this time by myself, and a boyfriend, and we were there to see this show called Ports of Intrigue, and it was a show about the work of William S. Burroughs. And William S. Burroughs, as you may know, wrote Naked Lunch and was really a big proponent of psychedelics and drug culture. He also shot his wife accidentally while playing a game called William Tell, where you put something on top of your head. And I was not as big of a marksman as he had thought. But the exhibition had this very raw, visceral approach to it. He had these series of what he calls shotgun paintings, which were really plywood that had been repeatedly shot over and over and over again, and it was fractured and splintery and violent and scary and horrific and so crazy interesting to me. Because it wasn't this neatly tied narrative, it was very complicated, and you had to look at all the layers of it to start to unpack it. And there are also films of him shooting, and that it felt like both disturbing and audacious and wrong, and yet told a version of the history in a very strange and interesting way. And while I think, as a feminist, my fascination with this piece has become more and more complicated as I've gotten older. It did teach me at that moment, it was really my first deep introduction into contemporary art and what contemporary art can do and how it can ask questions rather than answer them, and how it can complicate things in our stories and make things messy. But also take messiness and violence and chaos and pain and beauty and sorrow and hope and make something out of that and try to create meaning out of that. And that's the gift that artists give us, is that they create work that makes that kind of contribution, that creates a sort of lens or a structure around the world for us. So from there, I started to work at SFMOMA, not from 16 immediately to SFMOMA. We're jumping time a little, but I worked at SFMOMA in my after my undergrad, and I worked on a CD-ROM project that was very cutting edge at the time in 2000, called Making Sense of Modern Art. And again, it was really looking deeply at a work and trying to unpack its meaning and trying to then explain that meaning. This CD-ROM was targeted towards a middle school audience, just try and say, what do you see? How do you see it? How is meaning made within that framework? And we take a little fragment of, this is Robert Rauschenberg's collection, where it shows a piece of a Renoir on a piece of fabric, and talk about the references within the piece. And then now I'm at UMOCA as the director. And I wanted to give, before I dive into some of the things we're doing as an institution, I wanted to dive into some of the history, simply because the prompt of Roots. I wanted to dive into some of the history of UMOCA and where we've been and who we've been. How many of you can guess when we were founded? 1931. Well, there's some that did their homework, but yeah, we were founded in 1931, so we're actually the oldest permanent art center in Utah. Yes, that's the response I was looking for. Thank you. It's surprising. So we were founded in the middle of the Great Depression, and at the time, the woman that founded us, we were founded by a woman named Alta Jensen, and underneath her were a series of about 20 originators, and 17 of those originators were also women. And what they believed and what they sold to the people that were funding them was that arts was economic development. And it was dubbed at the time a little Greenwich Village for Salt Lake City. And it was a cultural center from its very beginning, and using a mix of contemporary artists, of local artists, of national artists, of international artists. They showed Diego Rivera in the 30s, which Rivera feels pretty tame now, but he was a communist, so there was an agenda to that kind of exhibition, and they showed Frida Kahlo, and this is what she said in response to a question about should we show nudity. She said, "Art in Utah we will never develop any art that is real or great in Utah until art can be anything it wants to be." She said that in 1938. It's beautiful, and I think it actually should be printed on the outside of our building in bold. Helvetica, because it really captures, I think, the spirit of who we are and her contemporary spirit, and of what a true art center can do. I think if you're trying to be so prescriptive about the kind of art that is being made and what that art can do, and to put it in a box, it will never be real or great. It will always be truncated, or it will always be, I don't know, for lack of a better word, damned. It'll always be stopped within that space. And so I think her framework really set us up in this really beautiful way, and that there was this boldness and audacity to the kind of work she wanted to do that was truly progressive for her era, and still actually is staking a very important claim to dialogues that art institutions are still having within our state. So this is an example of a few exhibitions that have been up in the past few years, and I just wanted to kind of show you a window into the work we do, and if you haven't been into our space, introduce you to some of the galleries. So I started working at the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art in April of 2019, so I'm still not quite a year out. But we started to talk about what is it that we wanted to do, and who is it that we wanted to be, and how did we want our programming to reflect our values and our sense of self and our mission, which I should have memorized, but I don't, so I'm going to read it off this piece of paper. Hold on. Okay, which is this. Open to all, the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art is Utah's only museum solely devoted to contemporary arts and culture. And through our exhibitions and programming, we engage in social issues, provide a platform for dialogue, and create a nurturing space for artists to work and develop. So, embedded in our mission is really a social justice and a social aware sort of platform and objective for us. This year now is 2020. Historic year. What happened this year? In February 14th of this year. Right. Yes, women voting, right? So this is a historic year. 150 years ago, the first woman voted in modern U.S. history here in Utah at Council Hall. It's impressive. It's important. And technically, Wyoming gave the right to vote to women before, but we were the first to cast the first ballot. But no point splitting hairs. It was us, yay for us, go team, go Team Utah. And it's also the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And I think because there's been enough distance between those times, we forget the kind of nonconformity, the kind of advocacy, the kind of feminism, the kind of, to borrow Pat Mitchell's term, the kind of dangerousness that required, and literal dangerousness for them. Some of them were treated as criminals in this pursuit to vote. They were kick-ass doing important things. They were really not willing to accept the status quo. And so we wanted to ask, what does that mean for us? What do these anniversaries mean for us? There's a whole campaign called Better Days 2020 that's looking at the history of what these women have done, and important women in our history, not just at those moments, but the first Olene Walker, the first governor of Utah. And Nylan is a dear friend who organized that. But I think if I could offer them one criticism, that campaign is very celebratory with lacking some of the bite that the suffragists had, and really saying, like, what the heck, we're not doing this anymore. We're not, these are conditions we will no longer accept. This is the condition we no longer want to accept. There was a recent study done about Utah, and Utah is for every $1 a man makes, women make 71 cents. And I was trying to explain this to my daughter, and she was like, well, let me do this in math. Like, if they made $200, and I said, well, it's kind of late for that. Why don't we just say they make $100, $1,000, and then you would make 710. And she said, that's a lot of money. I said, I know. She said, but why? Who makes that decision? I said, that's a very good question. Who makes those decisions? Is it the leaders? Is it the system? Is it that we're complicit in that? I think there's a more complicated answer, but I think those dialogues and those conversations actually start with us and start today. And so what we wanted to do was to organize, hey friend, organize an exhibition that pushed against that. So I wanted to return to these art museum trips that I started with, and really again, like, these are not museum goers. To bring 5 of these is quite brave, sticky peanut butter in hand. But going through school, I believed in meritocracy. I believed that you could earn an A, and that if you performed better, you got a better grade, and that translated into this very different, this story of success, that it was somehow corollary, that you could really, by merit, earn your way into success. And it was only, in entering the adult world and also becoming a mother and realizing that there were very different social expectations on myself than there were on my husband. In fact, just in November, I was asked to come out to New York for a project. I'm working on this exhibition that we're going to open up in 2024. And one of the organizers' spouses, who was quite involved in a 1970s feminist movement, said to me, do your children resent you that you work all the time? And I actually was so surprised at my response. My response was like, well, we have this really good nanny and everything's great and they really love her. And then I left and I thought, wow. I was like, why was I protesting so much? Why did I actually defend, have to create this picture? Actually, that's a very unfair question, and it's not a question she asked to the male peer that was sitting next to me. And I think, of course, as parents, you do worry about, you also do worry about those things. So, if I'm honest, it hit this spot in me that made me feel like, am I doing it right? And that's an unfair thing, I think, because that's I think those pressures are unevenly distributed, and that is part of the wage gap inequality as well. So one of the things I did in trying to sort out, kind of what motherhood meant to me and who I was within that space was my master's thesis. And in my master's thesis, I wrote on an exhibition called Global Feminisms. That was the first exhibition at the Sackler Center, and strike that first part of the name, but that is what it's called, the Sackler Center for Feminist Art at the Brooklyn Museum. This was an exhibition that was looking at feminism on a global scale of kind of where are we at now. The center is created around Judy Chicago's famed dinner party, but these were 2 works that were in the exhibition, and I was really interested in the way that that nursing is often defined very, it's like the one performance of parenting that is coded as good. There's a lot of things that are very subjective, what you feed your child. People will, disagree whether a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is actually a good thing to feed a child for lunch, but breastfeeding is so coded in that language of this is inherently good, in a way that can be moralist, in a way that can be problematic, and in the way that isolates the work onto one body rather than to two parents. So I was looking at the way that that theme had been represented within this exhibition. It was surprising to me because there were about 100 works in the show, and 7 tackled a performance of breastfeeding in various contexts. And that was interesting to me and felt like a kind of cultural marker of where we were at that moment. Okay, so Guerrilla Girls, we will get there. We're so close. Within a month or two of being the executive director of UMOCA, I was having lunch with with 2 friends, Libby Haslam and Virginia Pierce. And Virginia is the film commissioner for the state of Utah, and Libby's an architect. And they founded this group called 801 Creative Women that all can join for free if they just have events. So I encourage you to check them out. But they organized themselves in response to the Me Too movement. They just felt just really angry at what was going on, and they wanted women creatives in Utah to have a community and a place of dialogue to connect with one another. And it wasn't just network, but really to be a safe space for one another. And so we were eating lunch, and Libby said, wouldn't it be so amazing if you had the Guerrilla Girls come out? I said, yes, that would be so amazing. I just found out they're $10,000 to bring out, so maybe not, unless you want to write us a check. But the idea evolved, and the idea caught fire, and the idea caught momentum, and we were able to partner with allies and partners in order to realize not just a lecture, which will be happening on March 9th at the Rose Wagner, but also a whole retrospective in our main gallery. So I want to answer this question: who are the Guerrilla Girls? So the Guerrilla Girls are a artist activist group that was founded in 1984 in response to an exhibition organized at MoMA. And the exhibition was essentially a survey of painting and sculpture. And the curator at the time said, any artist that is not in this show should rethink his career. Problem A. And problem B was that out of the 170 artists in the exhibition, there were 13 women. And the artists in New York just said, no way, enough. So they started protest outside of MoMA, but they just felt like their protest was happening within an echo chamber and that they weren't really getting their word across. And so they pivoted their strategy, and they did it in 2 ways. One, in which they masked their identity. So it's spelled guerrilla like guerrilla warfare, but they wear actual guerrilla masks. And there's something very punny and silly and powerful about that strategy. And then they took on sort of the street art movement that was happening in the 1980s, and also the commodification kind of trend that was happening in the 1980s. So they borrowed from marketing techniques and billboard campaigns, and they put these posters all around town, breaking the law. That was another reason for the mask, is that they were breaking the law, with statistics. So they were arming their work with fact. So this is an example of one of their pieces. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met? Less than 4% of the artists in the modern section are women, but 76% of the nudes are female. And I just love that. They actually redid this. This was done in 1989. They did it in 2000, and they did it in 2014, actually with very little variance in terms of the percentages. It went up a little to 5%, and up a little to 86%. So we wanted to think actually also beyond the Guerrilla Girls. I'll go into a little bit more of their work in a little bit, but this idea snowballed, and we thought about Alta Jensen, who founded us, and we thought about these suffragists that had advocated for us, that gave me the right to be where I am today. And we thought about what we wanted to do to make this year a different year, and not just this year as a kind of tokenism because it's an anniversary, but really to set up a new trend for the entire decade. So this year at UMOCA is the Year of the Woman. We have 8 exhibitions that have only women artists, 6 of which are solo shows, which is a really big deal. And we put a whole campaign together around the Year of the Woman. We talked with Jackie Zahner. I wanted to bring her up because she's a Park City local, and she encouraged us to really think broadly. She said, write a manifesto. You're thinking about this too small. This is an important moment. Excuse me. And she encouraged us to get 100 allies giving it $1,000. We started that about a month ago. We have 27 allies. If you'd like to join us as an ally, please do. We have allies here in the room today. It's hugely impactful in terms of supporting what we're able to do with supporting women artists. But here's an example of the Guerrilla Girls' work. They will take up the entire main gallery. And I want to say that we had organized an exhibition called Utah Collects before we chose to do the Guerrilla Girls show. And it's looking at the work of about 3 collectors, and we thought that it would bring some cachet to our institution. The collections are really powerful. They have Warhol, Lichtenstein, Haring. But when we introduced the idea to donors and to supporters, people just ran past Utah Collects and said, Guerrilla Girls, we're so excited. That's something new. And we were also feeling, the Guerrilla Girls call people on the floor. They call all of us to the floor. I think there's not an institution that is not being critiqued or is not being having to look at their own practices by this work. And so one of the things we did is that we switched the power dynamics of the show. So the Guerrilla Girls were going to be in the smaller gallery, and we shrunk the Utah Collect show to almost as small as we could, and we gave the Guerrilla Girls the whole main gallery to switch that paradigm, to switch that power structure, giving them a larger voice and more space within our museum. And this is our manifesto. And this has been really meaningful to us, to stake a claim. And one of the most beautiful things that it says, I'll just read you the second half. 2020 is a new year. We stand at the precipice of a future yet to be determined. As we enter this new decade, we stand as allies, committed to a more equitable future. We stand together, united in our commitment towards a better, more inclusive world, drawing upon the legacies of those who came before us. We stand for gender equality. We stand for places and people that create and cultivate open dialogue and that hold a space for voices of all kinds. We honor the authority and impact that comes from voices of all kinds, and we create and when we celebrate creativity and diversity in Utah, and we call upon institutions to be inclusive of a wide range of voices, perspectives, genders, free of harassment. So over Sundance, I had the opportunity to have dinner with Kat Gund. She is a filmmaker and the daughter of a famous philanthropist and art collector named Agnes Gund. There's a documentary on her in Sundance called Aggie. And at that dinner, there was also another artist named Hank Willis Thomas, who just had a major retrospective of his mid-career retrospective at the Portland Museum of Art. He's the son of a famous famous art historian named Deborah Willis, Google him actually, or Instagram friend him. He does amazing work. And one of the projects that he and his studio had done was a project called For Freedom. So during the midterm elections in 2018, they did billboards in every state where there was an artist creating work that was social activism, that had a kind of dialogue bend. The one that the Guerrilla Girls did said, "Dear boss, hope you like your nice mansion. No wonder you can't pay us very much." They're really smart and interesting sort of works. But he was curious about this Guerrilla Girls show, and he was really touched by this idea of a manifesto, and has since put me in touch with a lot of people in his network, including the curator of the most recent Whitney Biennial, because of this manifesto, because he felt like it was an example of the way that an institution can be a place for a social platform, can be a place for dialogue, can be a place for change, in a way that it's perceived as actually more neutral than other locations. And so I'm going to attend a congress that team is putting together at the end of February to present this manifesto as a model for other museums to put together documents that stake a claim for the changes they want to make, for the values in which they stand for, and for where they want to be in this new decade. This is an example of another one of their works, and what was really powerful is that the Guerrilla Girls as partners said, we will give you, in some of the cases they are original work that we're using with their signature that had been previously used in campaigns. The other ones they gave us just very large high-res files for us to reproduce, because that's part of the work. It's ephemeral, it's consumerism, so it can be mass reproducible. That's inherent in the medium. So they gave us this and said, make it as large as you want. So this in our gallery is 24 feet by 20 feet. It's powerful. When you make a work that big, it's like a machine. It says something. Scale matters, and you're almost swallowed by it. And you cannot hide from it. The things that they're saying and the lines that they're staking. And again, they have this blend of wit and humor and cuttingness. For example, not having to undergo the embarrassment of being called a genius, having more time to work when your mate dumps you for someone younger, seeing your ideas live on in the work of others, not being stuck in a tenure-track position. There's pain there, but they're using wit to manifest it, and I think that's really meaningful. This one's pretty self-explanatory.
Put that in my dining room.
You have that in your dining room? Oh, that makes me happy. So going back to our statistics, this is their evaluation. They sometimes call these their report cards of these institutions, the Guggenheim, the Met, the Modern, the Whitney. So for us to have 6 solo exhibitions by women artists with so much less square footage than these institutions and so much less resources and so much less curatorial support is significant and is meaningful and is an example to our commitment. And as I said earlier, for us, this isn't tokenism for 2020. When we just rotated our galleries, we're opening all new galleries on February 5th. We took down 3 women solo shows. It's part of our practice, it's part of what we do, and it's part of our commitment towards inclusiveness. And so I wanted to show examples of a few other shows that will be opening on February 5th. This is Yael Pedrosa, and she's one of our artists in residence. So not only does she have a solo show, she was also given a studio for a year. I forgot the name of the work, even though wrote the label. But I'm going on a lot of Sundance evenings in a row, so my mind is a little foggier. But she talks about it as an exploration between, you know what, I have it right here, rather than having you watch me struggle. Hold on one moment. The exhibition reflects on the art. Excuse me, thank you. Actually, it's just right there, thank you. The exhibition reflects on the artist's relationship, thank you, with the natural world in both spiritual and visceral ways. Her title, Humascene, is a blend between two words, human and Anthropocene, which is our current geological epoch that is defined by rapid change and to ecological systems and climate largely from human impact. And so her work acknowledges the effect of humans on the earth through the inclusion of trash, debris, felled tree stumps in her work as material, but it also creates a more optimistic counter by depicting nature as capable, prevailing, and mystical entity that has the ability to reconstruct and resuscitate itself. And it's just a really powerful and beautiful show. I think the drawings are what is the word? They have this really nice fine lines to them. They're really well executed. I can't balance water in a microphone. I'm going to take a sip and then yes. A gulp and then yes. Thank you. The other show that we have is Rochelle Williams. Her work is called The Best Breast of the West. And there are these comic books that are also almost like journals, and she's talking about her own faith transition, but also that as she goes through that faith transition, how she discovers a lump on her breast and has to undergo treatment for breast cancer. So we're looking at a myriad of voices, and we have programming throughout the year exploring these ideas, and we are really standing behind the values that we put forth in this manifesto. We're having it up in our gallery with an opportunity for anyone who comes to sign it as allies and to be a part of that movement, to make a commitment to themselves to redefine this new decade. I was asked to write an essay for my undergraduate college, and on a survey of like 15 years of alumni, and I graduated in 2001, just months before 9/11, and my son is entering college in September. And so I have this weird kind of moment where I'm thinking of what happened in 2001, what happened the year I graduated, and where we are now in 2020, and the world in which he is inheriting, and the world in which, as this newly minted adult, if I can say that, if an 18-year-old is called an adult, and what that means within that space, and what more importantly I hope for all of us in this new decade to be, and what I want the world to be, and he's going in to see a world a war that started before he was born that is still ongoing, and a world of marginalization and of nativism that is rampant, and of racism that just seems so pervasive, and nationalism, And I want that, and I don't want that for him, and I don't want that for my daughters, and I don't want that for any of us, and I don't want that for myself. And so 2020 for me is this marker of change. When we look at these roots in which we've come from, going back to that theme of where we've been, we can draw on new water sources, we can build new branches, and we can change and build a more inclusive and more beautiful future. Thank you. Do you have any questions for me? Yes.
What role will your organization play with efforts to ratify the ERA here in Utah?
Yeah, I think that's great. I actually was just talking to Equality Utah last night. We're going to host a panel at our institution. Partly, I think, if we can build a conversation around that, that's something that's really meaningful. We're also, I don't know, one of the things we talked about was to have them be listed as a thought partner, so they're not having to make any sort of financial contributions, but we're saying our missions align. This is something that we support and they support, and we're going to keep partnering, not just beyond the panel, but any ways that we can moving forward. Yeah. There was another hand that it's yours, yeah.
Yeah, I work with of when
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question. February 7th is the public opening. So come, there's 2 musicians that are making, that are writing work in response to the Guerrilla Girls show, so they're doing all original music. That's February 7th. All of the galleries will be opening, including Yael's show and Rochelle's show. The other 2 shows that are opening are the Utah Collect show that I mentioned, and then we have a series for the whole year called the Pan American Identity Project. So we're looking at redefining what Americanism looks like, because there's 2 continents that claim that identity of themselves. And so the first one is a Canadian artist who's a First Nation, and his work will be on display as well. So yes, February 7th, and then March 9th is when the lecture will be. Tickets will go on sale soon, in the next few days, via arttix.com, and I think you can log in and just do it online, or you can do it at any Arttix distributor, and tickets are $20. We were going to do it originally at our museum, but our institution, our auditorium seats 150, and we've already pre-sold 260. So get your tickets now. I think it'll be really amazing. 7:30. Yes. Yeah, that's on March 9th. Yeah, that's on March 9th. Yeah, and then we're also partnering with Utah Film Center to do screenings of feminist films, including one called Black Feminism, another one called City Dreamers that's about women architects. There's another one called For Sama that, again, I'm blanking on what it's about, but all of those screenings are the last Friday of the month at UMOCA. So February 27th will be the first one. That one's called Female Pleasure, and it's looking at kind of how sexuality is taught or coded in different religious communities. And those will start at 7, so Friday night 7. And those dates will also be on our website, but if you look at the last Friday of the month, those are when those screenings are. And they're free and open to anyone. Yeah.
Did you say Park City was an ally, and how did we become allies?
You can go to our website. If you go to utahmoca.org/VIP, that's where the list of where you can be an ally. Sharon is one of our allies, as well as Amy Trombetti. I don't know if you know her. Oh, she's traveling. And Jackie Zanger and Vanessa Williams. That's the singer, not that one. Vanessa Wright. But you can go on our website to become an ally. Or if you need help after this, I can help you. Yeah. But anyone can sign the manifesto. For us, it was really important. Museums are always raising money. I was telling Cynthia before we got started that I asked 7 legislators for $250,000 yesterday, and so it is, part of what we do. But we also are a space that is free and open to everyone, and that being a public good and being accessible to people of all walks of life are really important to us and to our mission. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great question. For us, supporting local Utah artists is a big value for us, and it's a value that was important to Alta Jensen as well. So the institution has always been a blend of local, national, and international. We have an artist in residency program in which we cultivate 9 local artists. It's a residency program in that they are given free studios within our museum, but sometimes residency programs means you go and you fly out to like Alaska for a month or whatever, but this is, you have to be local to Utah to qualify. And so they have a gallery space solely dedicated to those artists. And then we have another space called Projects Gallery that's for anyone that has Utah ties or Utah connections or is a Utah curator or is a Utah art maker, putting for that space as well. The show that we closed before that was a look at 19 Utah artists exploring abstraction. And I'll end on this quote because I actually had it. Rochelle and Yael are both local artists as well, but for us, it's a big investment. And I think even when you bring international artists like the Guerrilla Girls into your space, you have to ask, how does this work? How does the meaning of our space impact this work, right? When they're making the work, they're not aware of our anniversaries. Those things don't matter. Those things are not at stake. But having their work within our space, within those anniversaries, affects, it's the lens in which you see it. So this is a quote by Lucy Lepard, who wrote a book called The Lure of the Local. And she said, art is or should be generous, but when working with place, artists can only give what they are receiving as well. The greatest challenge for artists lured by the local are to innovate, not just for innovation's sake, not just for style's sake, nor to enhance their reputation or ego, but to bring a new degree of coherence and beauty to the lure of the local. The goal of this kind of work would be to turn more people to where they are, where they came from, where they're going, and to help people see their places with new eyes. That's really important to me and really a key mission of what we're doing as well. We don't consider ourselves a regional gallery, even though we are showing Utah artists. It's important for us to showcase them on a rigorous sort of national level kind of framework, but to also honor what a place can do and how it can define a space and how it can impact work. But thank you everyone for coming.